So I'm Clare. I'm a senior lecturer at Northumbria University in the Department of Criminology. This is Kathryn Royal, who is a senior research officer at the national charity Surviving Economic Abuse, who are our partners on this project. Our co-I, Belen Barrispina from City St George's, can't be here today. She sends her apologies. So we're here to talk about designing out economic abuse in the UK banking industry. So we completed this research a couple of months ago. Our report was published a couple of weeks ago. So we're very excited to share some of the key findings with you. Just for anyone who doesn't know, our research is about economic abuse, which is a highly prevalent form of domestic abuse, and it often involves abusive intimate partners weaponizing banking products, so mortgages, credit cards, loans, current accounts, joint accounts, to restrict, exploit, sabotage their partner's access to economic resources, and it ultimately makes it possible for them to sort of manufacture situations of entrapment and dependency that make it very difficult for the victim to escape and to rebuild their lives. So our project is sought to sort of identify ways of making this abuse much more difficult to perpetrate in the banking context, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to let Kathryn say a little bit about our partnership with Surviving Economic Abuse.
So at Surviving Economic Abuse, we've heard countless times how perpetrators are able to misuse banking products to cause harm, to enact abuse, to restrict victim survivors' lives. So our nationally representative survey, which we carried out last year, conducted with Ipsos UK, found that 1 in 7 adult women in the UK had experienced economic abuse from a current or former partner in the last 12 months alone. Black and minoritized women were more likely to experience it, as were disabled women, as were younger women. Additionally, almost 1 million women said that they were prevented from leaving an abuser because of the economic abuse. So it's really, really vital that we're responding to it because we know it's keeping women in danger. Earlier in the year, this year as well, we also published a piece of research called Survivor Needs, and we heard the massive and really wide-reaching impact that perpetrators' restriction, exploitation and sabotage of banking products, financial products can have on victim survivors. And we also know from working with financial services that despite making massive steps forward and real progress in responding to economic abuse, there's really major barriers for them to kind of be able to support victim survivors. So we were really excited to be part of the project. So I was seconded across part-time to work with Clare at Northumbria. And it was just a really great example of a charity working with academic experts.
Yeah, so perpetrators of economic abuse are constantly finding new ways to weaponize banking products. I think it's a particularly wicked problem in the age of fintech, because they're easily applying for loans and credit cards in their partner's name without their partner's knowledge or consent. They can monitor and sort of surveil and control their partner's digital accounts. They can transfer large amounts of cash from joint accounts without the victim survivor's permission. They can even stalk the victim survivor now using the sort of real-time transaction notifications. So as Kathryn said, banks are gradually starting to sort of take notice of these issues. Some of them are developing responses, which is great to see. But what we noticed was that their work was still largely reactive. So responding once the harm had already been committed. So essentially, we wanted to look at more preventative measures. It aligns quite neatly with the sort of FCA's consumer duty, which now requires banks to avoid causing foreseeable harm to customers, and UK Finance as well has called upon financial services to identify ways of embedding positive friction within the customer journey to support victim survivors of abuse. So with all of this in mind, we've designed a project that will be led by victim survivors in collaboration with banking professionals, ideally with the goal of producing new ideas and new interventions that the financial services sector could learn from. Next slide, please. So as you can see, in terms of our methodology, it was a relatively small project, 6 victim survivor participants and 6 banking professionals. It was quite intentional. The aim wasn't really to produce generalizable conclusions, but rather to sort of uncover new design possibilities and opening up the design process to those who are most impacted by the products and the technologies we were exploring. And we also needed to make sure that our participants felt safe working together, that they had access to counselling and sort of trauma-informed support, and that they were reimbursed for their time. So our final sample consists of 6 banking participants from 5 major UK banks. 4 of them worked in vulnerability teams, 2 worked in product design, and then our 6 victim survivor participants were from different sort of organisations across the country. So as part of the project, we sort of innovated and implemented a describe, reflect, make participant redesign model, which informed all of our design sessions. And I guess the main thing just to draw your attention to is that the model is very much aligned with sort of principles of design justice. So the idea that the design process should be led by and for the communities that are directly impacted by the design outcomes. So in this research, the victim survivors actually led the design process. They defined its parameters. They decided which interventions were most important and so on. But I'll let Kathryn explain the methodology a bit more.
Thank you. So the first session was described. So this was just kind of getting everyone, all the participants, familiar with the evidence base on economic abuse and banking. So as part of the research, conducted a literature review, and from that we selected 5 themes which we thought would be most relevant to our participants, and created these evidence cards with kind of, something different from the evidence base. So whether it was a start, a finding, some practice, a quote from a victim survivor. And participants kind of explored these, took some time to reflect on them. Next slide, please. And then the second workshop was reflection, so getting participants to kind of reflect on the problem of economic abuse in banking. So again, using the evidence base and the literature, we created 2 fictional victim survivor journeys through banking products, which were then illustrated by the brilliant Stacey Bias, and that's what's on the slide. And so we also created how does this happen sheets so that participants could really understand how abusers were able to make these situations happen for victim survivors. And then again, we asked participants to kind of reflect on these situations, these scenarios, and kind of start to think as well about what could have been different in these situations so that the abuse might not have happened. And then next slide, please. Oh, thank you. And then, in the third session, we brought people together in person and they built different interventions together to address some of those problems they'd identified in the first sessions. So we created 4 sets of design cards for people to sort of have the building blocks of what a different intervention might involve. They created multiple ideas together. And then we also asked them to then refine 2 using safety by design principles adapted from the work of Eva Pensy-Merg in Australia. And these principles were kind of really designed to prompt participants to think about, safety features. Could a perpetrator misuse this feature, for example? Is this idea accessible to all victim survivors? And then that meant we had a series of ideas that had kind of been safety checked. And these ideas were presented to all the victim survivors from both groups. And they kind of selected which ones they thought were kind of the most priority.
So we don't have time to go through all of the ideas. This is one of the shortlisted ideas, which is essentially an industry-wide call for help, quite similar to the Ask for Angela scheme that you see in the nighttime economy, but for use across financial services, essentially to make it easier for victims to alert banks about economic abuse and coercion, but without raising the suspicions of the abuser. Just another example as well. A safe online banking mode, which would enable the victim survivor to hide their savings account, for example, or to block applications for new financial products, perhaps by clicking a sort of "Don't lend to me" button to stop an abuser who's trying to coerce them into debt, among other things. and this hide payments references feature as well, which would essentially make it a lot more difficult for perpetrators to send abusive or unwanted messages via the payment description field. But this idea actually goes beyond the use of profanity filters, so it actually requests the banks to change their terms and conditions to prevent sort of customers from abusing other customers and saying this is a breach of our conditions, this will have consequences. So in Australia, for example, they, with the victim's permission, would report this to the police. Some cases they'll unbank the abuser for that behaviour. So yeah, some interesting results there. But I think just for the purposes for the end of our talk, we just wanted to draw attention to the two winning ideas.
Yeah, so the first one, victim survivors really spoke about the use of joint products, joint accounts, mortgages, any loans and things like that. And this one was trying to kind of address some of that essentially. So there's two strands here. The first was around education. So the idea being that when all customers open a joint account, anyone, not just those who they think might be experiencing domestic abuse, there'd be lots of information provided to anyone opening a joint account around this is what economic abuse is. We know that perpetrators can sometimes misuse joint accounts as a form of economic abuse to carry out abuse. And then secondly, as part of this idea, there was also the idea of changing the terms and conditions of joint accounts to invoke tenants in common, which we know is something which is used in home ownership, like joint property ownership. And that would mean that if there was a dispute, the balance of the joint account could be split, which at the minute it currently can't be. And there would also be kind of options to use different settings. So for example, only being able to make certain changes in certain locations, or needing sort of both customers' consent to take over a certain amount of the joint account.
And then just this final idea that's currently on the screen is just around detecting and disclosing economic abuse. So they just wanted essentially for banks to use AI or machine learning to use, to better detect the abuse. They've got so much data, like they could be detecting this better. So victim survivors wanted to see that, and they also wanted more opportunities for more safely disclosing the economic abuse that they're experiencing. But yeah, just to draw your attention on the final slide, our report has been published a couple of weeks ago, and the QR code's there. We've obviously rushed through it, but there's a lot of intervention ideas in there. So if you're interested in having a look, then please do check out the report. Thank you.